Hello, friends. This is Dorie Clark, and I am here with Newsweek with our weekly show, Better. And I am so excited that we are going to be talking today to Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar. It is very timely. We're going to be talking about happiness, mental health, and the holidays. Tal, it's so great to have you here.
Great to be here, Dorie. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we also have wonderful listeners like you tuning in. And so if you are in the audience, please type into the chat box. Let us know where you're from. We always like to know who's here so we can give you guys a shout out. We will, of course, be taking your questions as well. So throughout the course of the conversation, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box for Tal, and we'll get to as many as we can. Tal, the first question that I was curious about and wanted to hear about, I mean, it's perhaps the obvious one. This is 2020. This is pretty much the most bizarre, oftentimes not great year in modern history. You are a scholar of positive psychology and happiness studies. In fact, you are the head of something called the Happiness Studies Academy. There's the URL for it. You're a former Harvard professor, have taught positive psychology there. What do you make of 2020? How does this tie in? How can people be happy in 2020?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, Dorie, a friend of mine recently said to me, Tal, shouldn't we quarantine happiness, at least for now? And, he has a point. But no, I don't think we should quarantine it. I think the science of happiness is as relevant, if not more so now than ever, because what it can do is it can help us become more resilient, help us better deal with hardships. So all the interventions that we talk about, from whether it's from gratitude, started off with Oprah. Today we have research about it. Whether it's general journaling, whether it's physical exercise, whether it's relationships, all the things that contribute to happiness, turns out also help us be more resilient.
That's great, Tal, and very helpful. And I just wanted to take a moment to shout out to some of the folks who are joining us live here. We have some great friends who are around. We have Katie Karlovitz tuning in. We have Janice from San Francisco, Whitney from Baton Rouge. We've got Mohsin from Morocco. Hello. Janice says shalom, Tal. We have Asim. We have Imani from DC, Gary. We have users from India. We have Todd Churches, who's actually himself going to be a guest in 2 weeks on the 21st. This is great. John Bouchard. So happy to have all of you guys here. Welcome. And Tal, another question that comes to mind. So you previously taught the most popular class in Harvard's history about positive psychology. Now, obviously, even before the pandemic, people were concerned about happiness. Lots of people really suffer in terms of trying to find that sense of calm and meaning and happiness in their lives. I'm curious, what do you do? What have you learned from being a scholar of happiness and positive psychology that you actually implement every day? So basically, tell us so we can copy you.
Happily. Oscar Wilde reportedly said that imitation is the highest form of flattery. So it would flatter me. A lot of the things that the science of happiness prescribes are common sense. Things like regular physical exercise. So usually I exercise 3 times a week. Actually, during the pandemic, it's gone up to 5. Why? Because I think, like many people, I'm a little bit more anxious, feeling more frustration than usual. So I need my fix more often. So regular physical exercise is one of them. I do write down my gratitudes on a daily basis. I think the most important thing, certainly in today's world, is identifying for ourselves islands of sanity. We live in a crazy busy world. Now, we're on Zoom a lot. There are no boundaries between, work and play or work and home. And we need those boundaries. And those islands of sanity can be technology-free times, when I sit down and just read or spend time with friends. Relationships are the #1 predictor of happiness. And it's relationships that we invest in. So single tasking rather than multitasking is important when it comes to relationships. I listen to music. This is my favorite form of meditation. And, listen to music with eyes closed, again, single tasking. And that's an important form of recovery.
Those are great tips, Tal. Thank you very much. I just want to greet some of the folks who have tuned in. If you're just tuning in, please type into the chat box where you're calling in from. We'd love to see you. We have Rob from Rhode Island. Anna's here. Martha from Andover, Mass. We have Tim from Crow's Nest Pass, Alberta, Canada. That's great. Dimitra from Athens. That's awesome. Ahmed from the United Arab Emirates. We're so glad to have our international friends here. And please, type your questions for Tal into the chat box. We'd love to hear what's on your mind so that we can take the best of his wisdom to ensure that the last 2 weeks of 2020, hopefully, are the best weeks of the year for you. Now, Tal, another question that I have for you, I know, in doing some research for this interview, that you actually did your dissertation on self-esteem. And I'd love to ask about that because I'm actually curious, how does self-esteem factor into happiness? Is there, I assume there's some kind of a relationship there, but how do they connect together?
Yes, so there's actually a very high correlation, and more than a correlation, there is a causal relationship between the two. So as our self-esteem increases, so does our happiness. And, it makes sense because what is self-esteem? It's the evaluation of myself, and we, as humans, we are constantly evaluating, and if we have a poor evaluation, we'll be less happy, of course. The important question, whether we're talking about the self-esteem of our children, whether we're talking about self-esteem at work and of ourselves, of course, is how do you increase it so that we can increase levels of happiness? And the answer is very much through our action. So yes, it's possible for me to stand in front of the mirror and say, I'm good, I'm great in every single way. And, for some people it works, for most people it does not. So just, talking about it is not enough. We need to take action. How do we take action? By acting as if we have self-esteem, even if we do not. Meaning, asking, what does a person with high self-esteem do? Well, one of the things that they do is that they pursue their passions. They're true to themselves. I can be true to myself, even if it doesn't come naturally to me. In other words, I can fake it until I make it, or fake it until I become it. Another thing, people with high self-esteem are generally calmer. Well, I know that through meditation, I can increase calm. And through that, I can increase self-esteem. So very much in an indirect way, acting as if I'm a person with high self-esteem. Even walking, person walking with their shoulders stooped versus a person walking with their shoulders, straight, or back straight. That's a person with self-esteem. So just doing that has an effect on our psychological state.
Tal, thank you. I think that's really helpful to bring in the behavioral element of it. And it actually ties in with a question from one of our users here that came through that I'm going to get to in just a moment. But if you are watching this, I just want to remind you, if you are enjoying the great insights that Tal is providing, please hit the like button and also hit the share button so that your friends and colleagues can benefit from the conversation as well. We love to spread the word. So there's a great question that came in from one friend watching this on LinkedIn. And their question was, any suggestions on how we can make Zoom chats and connections? I mean, pretty much all of our lives now it's all Zoom all the time. How can we make them more intimate and more live? If we're really trying to optimize for happiness, Tal, how do we do it when so much of our life is mediated through a screen?
Yeah, that, Dorie, if I was asked this question a year ago, or a similar question, I would say, look, you need in-person interactions. The virtual is no substitute for the real. Today, this distinction between the virtual and the real is not that helpful. However, there is another important distinction, and that is the one between deep and superficial. We can still have deep relationships via Zoom. We can still have deep relationships by phone. We can still have deep relationships through letter writing or email writing. The thing is, what we need is to put time into it and to focus on it. In other words, we need to make it a priority. It's not something that we do, by the way, while we're doing other work. It's something that when we do it, we do it. There's a wonderful book by John Kabat-Zinn called Wherever You Go, There You Are, which is the essence of mindfulness. So if you're on the Zoom call, be there, not multitasking, but single tasking, and put time aside. So if you have half an hour, then it's a half hour dedicated to that. If it's an hour and a half, even better. But we need those dedicated times so that we can truly be there, be present. And that is the key.
I think your emphasis, Tal, on presence is really important. It's so easy for us to be pulled or to feel pulled in a million directions these days. And that is certainly never more true when it comes to managing work and professional relationships during this time when so much of it has to be done from a virtual perspective. And so a question that came in that I would love to get your perspective on is from Janice. She wanted to know, Tal, how can leaders help their people maintain happiness while dealing with all of the pressures from work and, frankly, from life in 2020? What are your thoughts about it from a leadership perspective and how to sort of spread positive emotions in the workplace?
Yeah, so, Janice, this obviously is a very pressing issue today. I think that the number one reason why managers or leaders would call me, or in general psychologists, up is because of the pressure, because of the stress. Burnout is at a very, very high levels today. Stress and anxiety are probably the highest levels we've ever seen, at least since we started measuring, and that's decades. So what do you do about it? The thing to remember is that stress or pressure in and of themselves are not a problem. In fact, potentially stress can be good for us. I mean, think about the following analogy. You go to the gym and you lift weights. You're putting stress on your muscles. Not a bad thing. That's how you actually get stronger. The problem begins when you lift weights and a minute later, more weights and more weights and more weights. That's when you get injured. That's when you get weaker rather than stronger. The problem, therefore, is not the stress. The problem, rather, is the lack of recovery. So it's okay to experience pressure and stress at work or at home or in school if we also punctuate our crazy busy lives with periods of recovery. And that could be a 10-15 minute walk or going to the gym, or a meal while we're just having a meal, or just talking to a friend, again, single tasking, or getting a good night's sleep or a day off. And we need to do it artificially because naturally it doesn't happen, not in today's world when we are pulled in different directions. So managers who can, first of all, lead by example, and second, encourage their employees to take time off. Everybody will win. The organization will win because they'll have more productive, creative, satisfied employees. And obviously the employees will win because they won't just be happier, they won't just perform better, they'll also be physically healthier.
So I think that's great. A quick follow-up question, because I know this is something that impacts me. Many of my friends have said similar things. Even if we know we should take time away, we try to take time away, it's almost kind of an internal problem in some ways, that there's this compulsion that gets built up about, oh, but I have to check the email. Something might be happening or something might be going on. What can we do to actually control ourselves, even when, the outside world or outside circumstances may be okay with us taking a little time to reset, but internally we've sort of lost the ability to do that?
Yeah, no, this is a very, very important question because you're right. We do not take time off, and sometimes not because we can't, but because we feel guilty, or because we think we're, FOMO, fear of missing out, or some other reason. And what we need to do is remind ourselves that just like a racing car that goes around the track again and again and again, a racing car that doesn't take a break, a pit stop, the tires will blow up. They'll run out of fuel. And in the same way, we also run out of fuel. It's called burnout. Our tires also blow out. We break down. And we need to do it if we are to sustain peak performance as well as peak experience, so both happiness as well as success. We need to remind ourselves, and after we remind ourselves, we have to institute rituals, create habits. And in our calendar, just like we write, a meeting with our boss or with a client, we need to put in, meeting at the gym, or meeting, to go for a walk, or meditate, or have lunch with a friend. It doesn't matter, but we need to input these activities that are taking time off, in a sense, or a time out, are no less important than the activities where we are actually working. In fact, these time offs enable us to be on more of the time and more effectively when we are on.
I think that's really helpful. Thank you, Tal. And I'll just say for folks who are watching, if you are enjoying this conversation, every Thursday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, 5 o'clock London, we are doing these conversations with great leaders and thinkers on the Newsweek Better Show. If you want to make sure you never miss another one, you can actually make sure to subscribe to my LinkedIn newsletter, where we send you reminders every week. Just go to dorieclark.com/LinkedIn and hit the blue subscribe button, and you can make sure that you are always getting notices about that. Now, Tal, another question that I had, I was curious about this, because I think this is a more recent innovation, and I don't know enough about it. So perhaps you can tell us. But I understand that one of the primary places that you are spending your time right now is in something called the Happiness Studies Academy. Can you tell us what that is and who that's for?
Sure. So, about 5 years ago, I was on a flight. Remember those days when we used to fly? So one of those. And a question came to me. And the question was, how is it that there is a field of study for psychology, which is what I do, and philosophy and history and business and neuroscience and literature, and there is no field of study for happiness? Yeah, there is a positive psychology, but that's just the psychology of happiness. What about what philosophers had to say about happiness, and theologians and neuroscientists? And what about what movies can teach us about happiness? There's so much wisdom out there about it. Why isn't there a field, or rather an interdisciplinary field, that sheds light on what I've come to call life's ultimate currency, the currency of happiness? And with a few colleagues of mine, we started this relatively new field, and we founded the Happiness Studies Academy, where we introduce our students to the science of happiness and help them answer two questions. How can I become happier? And how can I help others do the same? Whether it's in the workplace, whether it's at home, whether it's in school, whether it's in our communities. Why is that important? Well, because happiness is good in and of itself. We all want to be happy. We want others to be happy. But more than that, happiness also leads to benefits such as improved relationships, such as more kindness and generosity, such as improved physical health, as well as longevity. So there are many benefits to increasing our own and others' levels of happiness, again, in organizations, in our homes, in our schools.
That makes sense. Thank you. And speaking of happiness, one of the ways that people can do that is, of course, to get more involved socially and build communities. And so we had a great comment that came in from Annette, who said that my 2020 happiness in this COVID time is meeting up in communities of creative leadership, like our weekly Better Show, and communities led by some other great thinkers. So thank you for that, Annette. We're really glad to have you here. And so, Tal, a great question came in about essentially how we can reset ourselves. This LinkedIn user wants to know, how can you quickly adapt, hopefully within a few hours, if you just get this wave of stress, there's uncertainty, there's loss of control. Is there a way that instead of kind of ruminating and letting it spiral, that we can somehow do something to snap ourselves back to baseline? What would you recommend for a situation like that?
Yeah, so the first thing I would recommend is experiencing the experience. In other words, giving ourselves the permission to be human, to experience whether it's frustration or anxiety or fatigue or sadness or whatever it is that we're going through. Because when we reject these painful emotions and perhaps unwanted emotions, what we do when we reject them is that they only intensify and grow stronger. And it's when we allow these emotions to flow through us, that is when they do not overstay their welcome. So the first step is acceptance of where we are. In fact, the foundation of happiness is first allowing in unhappiness. Now, how do we do that? What can be helpful for that reset? The first thing we can do is, shed a tear if that is what we feel like doing. There's a lot of research showing that when we cry, we release oxytocin. That's the love hormone. It makes us feel, good inside. When we cry, we release opiates. In other words, drugs that actually calm us. In addition, we can talk about it, whether it's with our BFF, whether it's with a colleague, whether it's with a therapist, or we can write about it. There's a lot of research on journaling that shows just how effective it is in good times as well as in difficult times. So when we express ourselves in writing, we help ourselves overcome anxiety or sadness, and writing helps us make sense of our situation and therefore prepares us to move on.
I think those are really helpful tips, Tal. Thank you for that. That's great. And just a reminder, if you have thoughts or questions about happiness, especially happiness now in the middle of December, toward the end of a very crazy year, please type them into the chat box for Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar. We'd love to get your questions and comments. So one came in, Tal, from Sumia that I thought was quite interesting. Sumia mentions that most, philosophical thoughts, most philosophers talk about happiness as tied to virtue, and they're discouraging the pursuit of happiness per se. Instead, they focus on living a virtuous life. But these days, a lot of people are thinking about happiness as their explicit goal, the thing itself that they are aiming towards. What do you make of this? Do you feel like this is misguided, or how should we think about the quest for happiness?
Yeah, no, I think that Sumia is spot on, in fact, in her distinction. You see, there's research by Iris Moss and others showing that people who wake up in the morning and say, I'm pursuing happiness, or happiness is very important for me, or it's a top value for me, they actually tend to be less happy. And for various reasons. Now, there's a problem with that because, I just talked about all the benefits of happiness, that not only does it feel good to feel good, you'll also be healthier, you'll have better relationships, you'll perform better at work, you'll be more creative, more productive. I mean, I want that. So on the one hand, I'm told, well, you shouldn't really pursue it. But on the other hand, it's very good for you. We're at a paradox, in a sense. So how do we resolve this paradox? We resolve it by pursuing happiness indirectly. And let me use a metaphor that I think can help understand this. So let's say we have the sunlight above us and we look at it. Well, it's going to hurt me. It's very difficult to look at it directly. But what if I allow the sunlight to break down, and then I look at the broken down sunlight through a prism, say. I look at the colors of the rainbow. Now I can look at it and even enjoy it. In the same way, pursuing happiness directly, that can actually hurt us. But what if we break down happiness to its elements, to its metaphorical colors of the rainbow? Well, then we can enjoy them. What are these metaphorical colors of the rainbow? Relationships. When we pursue our relationships, we are becoming happier. A sense of meaning and purpose in life. Being virtuous, being good, helping others, kindness contributes to happiness. Now, if I wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to invest more in my relationships, or I wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be virtuous, even kinder than I usually am, or I'm going to exercise regularly, which is another indirect path to happiness, then what I'm doing is indirectly pursuing happiness and becoming happier. So that is the way to resolve this seeming paradox that on the one hand, we want happiness. Most people want to be happy. And on the other hand, we know that pursuing it directly hurts more than helps.
Great insight. Thank you, Tal. And just as a reminder, if you're interested in learning more about Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar and his work, you can go to happinessstudies.academy. And if you'd like to find out more about my work and sign up for my email newsletter so you never miss one of these super cool LinkedIn live/live stream sponsored by Newsweek, you can go to dorieclark.com, sign up for this self-assessment there, and you will be notified so that you can get these forever. Now, we have time for a couple of questions, Tal. And Lisa had, I think, a really great point about some of the gender dynamics at work. You mentioned that crying can be really helpful as one of the vehicles. If you're feeling bad, if you're feeling loss of control or uncertainty, you were just mentioning that crying can actually be very cathartic as a way of resetting. But she said, women have permission to cry culturally, much more than men do. Do you think that's why men actually suffer disproportionately from health issues like heart attacks that are often stress-based? How do you think about gender when it plays out with this?
Yeah, no, great. So there's some fascinating research on gender and gender differences. And again, of course, when we're talking gender differences, we are generalizing. However, here are some interesting data points. So men tend to suppress certain emotions. Specifically, men are more likely to suppress fear. And when you suppress an emotion, as I mentioned, a painful emotion, that is, what happens is that emotion intensifies. So the outcome is that they experience even more fear. The outcome is that the fear is more likely, therefore, to control them. Courage is not about not having fear. Courage is about having fear and going ahead anyway. Well, one is less likely to be courageous when the fear is suppressed rather than when it's embraced and accepted. And finally, and this is the important point, when we do not give ourselves the permission to experience an emotion like fear, it has to come out somehow. And how does it come out? Very often physiologically, whether it's through backache or often something which is much worse, such as it could even be chronic disease or other illnesses. So this is men. When it comes to women, what are the emotions that women are most likely to reject? Again, this applies to men as well, but more women than men. Anger. Why? Because it's not considered feminine to be angry, right? So I'm not going to be angry and I suppress it. And then what happens? Same thing as happens with fear. The anger only intensifies. Sometimes it comes out, explodes. Other time, in other words, more likely to control behavior. It can also manifest itself physiologically through some physical ailment. Now, when we cry or write about it or talk about it, we are expressing rather than suppressing. We're giving ourselves the permission to be human. And then we have more control over our subsequent behavior, and physically will be significantly healthier. By the way, this is another interesting gender difference. So in a men-women relationship, there is a side, and I'm talking about long-term relationships, there is a side that benefits more than the other, and that is men. Why? Because women tend to, again, generalization, but women tend to share more with their girlfriends before. They are open up more than men. Whereas with men, very often their partner is the first person they really open up to. So there is a lot more that they can gain from the relationship, again, that women often got in other or get in other relationships as well. So there are some interesting gender differences, and it's important to learn that both for men and for women, crying, expressing by talking or by writing has many benefits. We shouldn't get in the way of our nature. And because when we get in the way of our nature, we inevitably pay a price.
Such a good point, Tal Ben-Shahar. We have time for one more quick question. Again, if you want to learn more about Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar, go to happinessstudies.academy. dorie.academy. And if you would like to learn more about me and about our weekly Newsweek show, go to dorieclark.com and sign up for the self-assessment there. The last question, Tal, so many good ones this week. I love this. In fact, there was, I'll just put this up on the screen. Julie says, this would have to be one of the best talks I've seen in a while. I love how practical and insightful Dr. Tal's communication is. Thank you so much. Well, thank you to Julie, and thank you, Tal, for your insights. This is fantastic. The last quick question from Annette, I think this is relevant for all of us. Do you, Tal, have any practices that you use in transition from year to year or seasonally? You know, the new year's coming up. How can we think about that transition period?
Good. So, you know, New Year's resolutions, so many of us have them. Most of us do not fulfill them. So here is what science tells us. Science tells us, yes, we need to write them down and come up with a list of New Year's resolution, and then choose one or two that you're going to take up, not more. And after you take them up, find an accountability buddy. It could be your partner or friend or colleague, and do it together. Because when you do it together, you're not 10% or 20% more likely to actually persist. You're 200% more likely to persist. So identify one or two things that you really want to change, that you think will make a difference in your life, in others' lives, and then find someone that you're accountable to, and then just do it.
That's amazing. Wise words for all of us. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. Tal, thank you very much. We'll be back next Thursday. That's the day before Christmas. And we're interviewing Jyoti Singhvi, talking about how to communicate effectively even on Zoom. Believe it or not, it can be done. That's the topic for next week. Tal Ben-Shahar, thank you so much for joining us. And thanks to all of you for tuning in.
Thank you, Dorie. Thank you all.